Let me ask you straight, puppet, how many brown people did you count before you decided their deaths were okay? You're really going to smile while I'm talking? Go ahead please and keep smiling, because I've got proof with your name on it. Approving violence. You didn't think that document would come out, did you? June 18, 2025, was a day that began with the kind of stiff formality we've come to expect from Senate Armed Services Committee hearings. Yet no one could have anticipated the emotional voltage that would course through the chamber by mid-morning. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth arrived with the confidence of a man long accustomed to dodging hard questions with vague jargon and patriotic bravado. As the cameras settled in and microphones flickered to life, there was little indication that this would turn into one of the most publicly dissected and morally consequential confrontations in modern American political history. But it didn't take long before that transformation began, when Michigan Senator Elissa Slotkin took her turn at the mic. The tone of the hearing veered from the expected technicalities of defense budgeting into the raw, uncharted terrain of constitutional ethics, military restraint, and the dark underbelly of federal force. Slotkin's voice was calm but unwavering when she delivered the question that pierced through the perfunctory small talk like a dagger through silk. Have you ever authorized or would you ever authorize the use of lethal force against protesters on American soil? She asked. The weight of those words stunned the room into silence for a beat. There was no wind-up, no rhetorical inflation, just a simple, direct inquiry that every citizen in a democracy has the right to know the answer to. But Pete Hegseth, perhaps caught off guard or simply used to operating under the protective armor of power, didn't give her a straight answer. Instead, he offered a smug grin and leaned into a condescending non-answer that sounded more like a cryptic joke than a serious response. Senator, I'd be careful what you read in books, except for the Bible, he said. His grin widened, as if he had just told the cleverest joke in the room. But the silence that followed wasn't laughter, it was dismay. Slotkin's face reflected that disbelief instantly. Oh my God, she muttered, her face contorting between shock and disgust. And then, like a prosecutor demanding the truth from a reluctant witness, she pressed harder, repeating her question, this time with even more urgency. Her repetition wasn't for drama, it was for clarity, for the record, for accountability. But Hegseth remained elusive, slipping behind vague language and suggesting that the rules of engagement in domestic scenarios were legally ambiguous. He went on to describe temporary detainment structures and emergency assessment protocols without once addressing the core issue: under what conditions, if any, had the federal military been pre-authorized to fire live ammunition on U.S. citizens engaged in protest? The more he dodged, the more obvious it became that something was being deliberately hidden. Slotkin wasn't satisfied, and neither was anyone watching. And just when it seemed that Hegseth might slip away unscathed, when his smug confidence was beginning to return, a new voice cut through the air like a thunderclap. Representative Jasmine Crockett stood, her eyes locked with Hegseth's, and the entire room shifted. The oxygen changed. Her presence wasn't just commanding, it was volcanic. This ain't no war zone, Mr. Hegseth. This is America, she said with searing clarity. And unless you're telling me the U.S. military's new enemy is unarmed citizens with cardboard signs, I want to hear a straight answer. In that moment, every bit of false assurance Hegseth had clung to began to crumble. He tried to look away, to pretend that Crockett's words hadn't just shattered the thin facade of his authority. But it was too late. She had the floor now, and she wasn't relinquishing it. Crockett pressed again. Kia appen Trump se green light li tea for this kind of martial law fantasy? Yeah opki Bible exception, doctrine ka part high? Her language was razor sharp, laced with indignation and armed with truth. She had caught Hegseth in the contradiction between his public religious posturing and his private flirtation with unconstitutional domestic militarization. Hegseth opened his mouth to respond but stopped. There was nothing clever left to say. He glanced toward committee members as if silently pleading for intervention, but no one stepped in. This was Crockett's moment, and the political weather inside that room now belonged entirely to her. Then she produced what would become the most damning visual of the day, a thick dossier filled with leaked communication between Department of Defense officials and ICE regarding emergency engagement scenarios in Los Angeles. This here, Crockett declared, holding the folder high, is leaked communication, draft protocols, contingency planning for use of troops in Los Angeles during anti-immigration raids. You want to tell me why there's any mention of lethal engagement options against civilians? Hegseth visibly flinched. His hand quivered as he reached for his own papers. Stalling, the confident tone he had used with Slotkin earlier was now gone. That document isn't operational. It was just a contingency, he stammered. But Crockett didn't let the opening slip. She hit him with the line that instantly went viral. The sentence that shook even the most stoic officials in the room. Contingency? So was the Constitution, sir, until y'all started walking over it. There was a collective intake of breath. Then, silence. That line didn't just stop Hegseth, it paralyzed him. His shoulders sagged slightly, his chin dipped. The room was still, except for the click of journalists' keyboards catching every word, every movement, every sign of surrender from a man who had just been politically outclassed and morally eviscerated. Crockett wasn't performing for applause. She was delivering justice with the precision of a scalpel and the force of a sledgehammer. She turned the conversation away from vague hypotheticals and dragged it into the grim, real-world consequences of unchecked military power. "Do you know what it looks like when federal troops kick down doors in immigrant communities?" she asked. "Do you know what it sounds like when a 7-year-old screams because they think their mom's about to be shot?" Her voice cracked, not from weakness, but from rage, from truth. She laid bare the human cost of policies written in sanitized language behind closed doors by men who would never face the consequences of their own decisions. "And you're sitting there quoting the Bible while authorizing stormtroopers to roll through LA, like it's Baghdad?" she added. Each word was a punch, each syllable a condemnation. Hegseth could no longer respond. He was silent, blinking, swallowing hard, trying not to break on live television. What began as mockery had turned into a complete psychological unraveling in real time. The same man who had mocked Slotkin for daring to ask moral questions was now shrinking before the nation, exposed by the unrelenting force of a truth he could not evade. Crockett then delivered a final indictment that echoed across the airwaves. "You give these orders and black and brown bodies end up in the morgue while you sit in your AC command room writing Bible verses on ammo crates." The image alone was searing, unforgettable. Within hours, that entire exchange had consumed the national news cycle. Hashtags exploded. Hashtag Constitution not contingency. Hashtag Crockett Unleashed, and hashtag Hegseth Shivers trended worldwide. Civil rights groups called for immediate inquiries. Protesters hit the streets in over a dozen cities demanding full transparency of all domestic military protocols. Editorial boards across major publications praised Crockett for her fearlessness, with some declaring her the moral compass of a party long plagued by timidity. Meanwhile, even centrists and center-right figures began asking whether Hegseth's words were not just evasive, but disqualifying. Perhaps most surprising of all was the unity that formed between Slotkin and Crockett. One had posed the initial question that revealed the rot, and the other had carved it out for the world to see. They represented two wings of the same political movement, one moderate, one progressive, coming together not over ideology but over integrity, and that, more than anything, scared those in power the most. Later that night, on a primetime cable news panel, a visibly shaken Hegseth tried to recover some ground, but his voice cracked when confronted again with Crockett's quote. "She mischaracterized," he tried to say, but the host interrupted. "Did you or did you not authorize a draft plan that allowed federal troops to fire live rounds during raids on American soil?" Hegseth paused. He blinked. I can't comment on that," he finally said, and that was it. The unraveling had gone national. Jasmine Crockett, on the other hand, didn't backpedal or soften her language in the days that followed. She doubled down. She took to every platform, news shows, social media, and community town halls, to insist that this fight wasn't just about one document or one official. It was about the soul of the nation. "You can't preach patriotism while erasing the parts of the Constitution that make you uncomfortable," she told one anchor. "You don't get to quote the Bible and ignore the Beatitudes that command compassion and justice." With each appearance, her support grew. Donations poured in. Civil liberty groups rallied behind her, and in the eyes of millions of Americans, she became the voice that broke the silence, that forced the truth to finally surface. It was never about shouting the loudest. It was about speaking with unflinching clarity when everyone else was content to whisper behind closed doors. Jasmine Crockett didn't just make Pete Hegseth shiver, she reminded every citizen watching that democracy demands confrontation, that truth must never be polite when power becomes predatory. She stood up not just for her constituents, but for the Constitution itself, and for that, history will remember her not just as a congresswoman, but as a force of reckoning. If you believe that voices like Jasmine Crockett's are vital to our democracy, if you believe in holding the powerful accountable, and if you want more stories that peel back the veil on government decisions that affect real lives, then please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell, because truth matters, and when it's spoken boldly enough, it doesn't just echo, it shakes the foundations of power.